Ani, bonjour, Tanzi, Sega, welcome everyone. My name is Nochmoen Mashkogiashk, better known as Philip Cote III. I belong to the Underwater Panther clan, and I'm also a band member of Moose Deer Point First Nations. Today, I'm here to share with you a traditional land acknowledgement. ArtworxTO, Toronto's Year of Public Art 2021, and the City of Toronto would like to acknowledge our presence on the land that has been the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee peoples since time immemorial. And in 1805, with the signing of the Toronto Purchase, is now the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. As we reach back to those first Torontonians, we remember our Mother Earth through the 7 grandfather teachings: wisdom, bravery, respect, honesty, truth, humility, and love. The stories of each of these nations endure and continue to guide our thoughts and actions on this land. And as we acknowledge our Mother Earth, we acknowledge the medicine wheel and its teachings. We recognize the 4 directions: north, south, east, and west, and the 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. It is these 4 seasons that represent the circle of life. Nindanoe Maganidak, which means all my relations, which means we are all related. Aho, miigwech matakuyasan.
Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Katriina Campitelli. I'm a public art officer with the City of Toronto. My incredible co-host is Rebecca Carbin, a former public art officer, the creator of the Waterfront Toronto Public Art Program, and presently the founder and principal of Art Plus Public Unlimited. I'm so excited to be back here with our second episode of Live at 5 as part of ArtworxTO, Toronto's Year of Public Art. ArtworxTO is 1 full year of public art programming all across the City of Toronto. We have over 1,400 artists, more than 300 new installations, murals, screenings, performances, and events, all continuing for the next 10 months or so. The ArtworxTO Live at 5 Talks will highlight some of these amazing projects and other awesome initiatives that are happening all around our city.
Thanks, Katriina. Live at 5 is a series of talks about some overarching issues within public art practices today. As we developed this program in the midst of a global pandemic that began as a health crisis and morphed into a crisis that engaged politics, social economics, and so many aspects of civic engagement, we decided to assemble our overarching issues with a central concern for different aspects of art and health: personal, social, societal, physical, mental, and emotional. We want to engage with some of the numerous incredible programs and projects that Toronto's artists and arts workers are undertaking this and every year, and to invite discussion around the important intersection of art and wellness, when, if, and how art can better ourselves and our society. So we're excited to have developed a program that will examine 5 themes over 10 events. This means giving our audience and moderators a chance to marinate on points of tension within each chapter 1 of our discussions that will deepen in the second chapter. Through this series, we address emerging from the pandemic better, and I'm excited to be going, the next topic is emerging from the pandemic better, community building through the arts, dismantling our existing understanding of monuments and reestablishing a landscape for the future, all access arts and accessibility, and art and mental health.
So today's discussion is the second of 2 talks centered around projects that were developed within and in response to the pandemic. What projects unfolded, what we learned, what we convinced ourselves to look forward to, the physical, emotional, societal aspects of wellness investigated through art practices in different media. We have some fabulous panelists today. I'm so excited to hear how their artist practices have adapted and evolved and how they're helping their communities as well. But first, a few housekeeping notes before we get started. We're live for a quick 60 minutes. If you're watching us on YouTube, please feel free to type your questions for the panelists into the comments. We will have a question period near the end of the hour. If you want to rewatch this video again later, this episode and all of our Live at 5 videos will be available in the ArtworxTO on-demand library at artworxto.ca. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our amazing moderator. Melissa Vincent is a Toronto-based writer, editor, producer, and content strategist. Her work broadly investigates questions of equity, intimacy, and community formation as it relates to music, art, technology, and culture. She's been featured, it's a long list, in Pitchfork, Billboard, and NPR Music, The Fader, CBC Music, Elle Canada, Vice, Canadian Business, and the Globe and Mail. In the past, she's led strategy for content platforms operated by Blue Ant Media, Universal Music Canada, and Banger Films. She's a Prism Prize juror, a SOCAN Songwriting Prize Panelist, and she's a Polaris Prize jury foreperson. And finally, she's also a member of the Mayor's ArtworxTO External Advisory Committee. Over to you, Melissa.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for that really warm introduction. It's always a bit strange to have yourself read about, but thank you for that. And I am really, really thrilled and excited to be hosting the second edition of this talk. I think I love the design of this conversation series where we're really letting some of these big themes sit with our panelists, sit with our viewers, and just make a conversation that is far too large for 60 minutes extend into something a bit broader. In our last conversation, so much of what came up was how the pandemic taught artists and institutions to think about how they create work with intention, how they build work and programs that fit the needs of a community that's rapidly changing as conditions change and as we slowly figure out what it means to reopen, what we're reopening into. So I'm really excited to hear from everyone today on where we've been, where we're at, and where we're going. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first panelist, Jord Pimentel. Thank you. George is regarded as Canada's most renowned celebrity photographer. From Toronto to Hollywood, he has photographed every A-lister star there is. He regularly attends the most glamorous events in the world, such as the Oscars, Golden Globes, the Met Gala, to royal weddings. Being a third-generation photographer, you can usually find him in his studio in Little, Portugal. George, welcome. I'm excited to hear from you. Oh, I think you might be on mute.
Okay.
How's that? Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for having me. This is an honor, and I just want to make sure everyone is staying safe. And it's been a rough ride in the last 2 years, I guess. But it all started, I just wanted to just show you that, yeah, everyone was filled with anxiety because what were we going to do with COVID? And you have to understand, in 2020, my life, my life was filled with shooting events, 500 events a year. But when I first started, maybe we could start clicking on the images. There we go. So this, I'll make it very quick. We're gonna roll through all these images. If we could just, go through. Yeah, this is when I first started my career. I was a street photographer, and that I didn't make any money. I didn't make a living, and that's what I did. And sure enough, the street photography, got me to, all of a sudden, roaming the streets, dealing with celebrity. And this is what I was doing. And do I miss it? Yes. And do you notice the crowds? Like pre-COVID, my world was elbow jousting at the Cannes Film Festival. As soon as, this was my life. As soon as COVID hit, there was a panic. And we're going to hold that photo. Let's hold that photo. there was a panic, like everyone. I mean, I remember Tom Hanks, when they announced he got COVID, I said, this is a serious thing. And I didn't understand it. I don't even think anyone in high school learned anything about the pandemic of the Spanish flu in 1918. So I started researching, and this is where it all comes back. And with COVID, everyone has discovered themselves. And I'm going to tell you something, I discovered myself. I went on a 360 backward and forward self-realization because of this photo right here. This photo, I could not understand it. At the time, I said, this is what people were doing. They were wearing masks, and I thought this photo was so powerful. Even the pandemic couldn't stop their love from touching each other. And that gave me the incentive to start researching more photos. And you can start flipping. This, I'm finding, are we heading into this? This is unusual. And this is the moment. I go visit my father, and sure enough, all the elderlies are inside, and I take a photo with my cell phone. And I started taking photos for the sake of a historical value. I went back to the streets. I haven't done this work in 25 years. And there I was picking up, my camera, one lens, one body, no celebrities, no publicists, no art directors, no pressure. And it was a beautiful thing. I walked through the streets, and I found all the chapters of COVID. And I just found it so interesting how people were adapting to it. And I wanted to document this because of the Spanish flu's photos. I wanted my photos to kind of be this historical document, maybe in Canada one day. I want my great-great-grandchildren to look back at my photos and say, can anyone believe we are going through a pandemic, that we're living through a pandemic? And so, sure enough, every day there was a story. Every day I was driving, watching people line up, surviving, the toilet paper syndrome, social distancing, the essential workers, people just coming together, businesses going down, stores, restaurants being closed, kids lying around, deserted streets, homeless. Look, can you stop on that photo for a second? Me driving around in an empty street, people couldn't even go outside. People were like, are you crazy? I put on a mask, and this photo in particular, I pulled over, and I thought, look at what this homeless man is doing. He has a fishing rod with a cup on the end of it, because you can't talk about social distancing. So these were chapters, and we can keep flying through them. And just people deserted streets, waiting for the bus. I had, the airports, everything closed. Traveling, masked, sanitized, checking your temperatures. Just, can you hold that photo there? I started documenting the chapters, and it was very important for me. These particular photos, I met people who actually suffered, who had COVID. And I photographed them, and everyone had a story, and everybody, all the news is, go ahead, we'll keep flying through them. All these people had a story, that people were actually dying of this thing. People started living, started doing fashion shows. Hanukkah, I just felt, just walking through a deserted area, documenting how people were living. People, I felt, still needed to continue their life, and how they were adapting. And, as the businesses were closed, you keep going. Every day the barber shops opened up. That's the story. The malls opened up. In the end, there were so many chapters to it. I would chase ambulances to photograph the frontline workers. And I just felt that the world started to get kinder, and things like celebrity didn't matter anymore. And it was a beautiful time. It was a beautiful time to photograph real situations. and make some sort of impact and try to help people with the photographs. And just going around every day, like people doing their birthdays and, you know, pride, then still continuing, you know, people like putting up signs and just traveling on the subway and just, you know, yeah, it was one of these things where I said to myself, well, what's the next level? And, you know, from graduations, from girls buying their dresses and they had nowhere to go, from, you know, baseball teams still continuing. Can we hold that on this? The stories were coming my way. This is a particular series that I did across the street because the band, the church band, had nowhere to play. And they used to do the processions in front of here, and they were still practicing inside their homes. And again, talk about practicing and creating your art. So I wanted to document people, this is their art. It was a good time for people to write, good time to do paint, sculpt. It was a great time to do artists. So I took it back. I felt like I was 18 years old again doing this. But I felt there was more. And what was important to me was I couldn't get enough of what was the rest of Canada doing. And sorry, going back to, look at Black Lives Matter. Like imagine having such a tough time and people protesting during COVID. Like that is history. And restaurants opening back up, patio restaurants. How many times have we seen this? And events, society events popping up again now. And that's where we're at right now. But the most important thing was, what was the next stage of this? And for me, I didn't want this project to be about myself. There was more. Can we hold that photo? Can we hold that photo? Go back, back, back. Sorry, the woman hugging. There. This photo was very important to me because this woman asked me to come up, and I haven't hugged my mother in over a year. Would you like to come up and take this photo? And I drove up to Guelph to take that photo. And this was a sign that we are getting through this. And at the beginning, we were always saying we were going to get through this. But going back to this, which was really important for me, I started thinking, I said, I want to know what's going on in Vancouver. I want to know what the Indigenous are doing. I want to know what's going on in the East Coast. I want to know what's going on in Calgary, everywhere. And I created a hub. And thank God, I hate to say it, I'm thanking social media. And I thought of a project. I thought the Canada COVID Portrait. We named it, I formed a team, and I couldn't have done this without them. Okay, Arden Burrows, Jeff Harris, Taryn Pataski. We all came together and we said, let's do this so we can bring everyone's work together. And through a hashtag called Canada COVID Portrait. It was that simple. And I used a little bit of my power, and I started asking photographers to submit, and we started submitting, and then we got news, we got publicity. I remember the story. The story was, well, they needed some positive. Every day was negative COVID stories. Well, they thought, well, George Pimentel is not on the red carpet. What is he doing? And this is what can you go back to that photo? The doctor. Look at this photo. I was blown away. Like, look at this photo. I couldn't get that photo. This is a nurse who took this photo with her cell phone. I believe, or maybe it was somebody, but I couldn't get that access. Like, look at this. That's COVID. That's a COVID photo. Let's keep going. So these are the photos that people are submitting and expressing themselves. And I thought, this is such a beautiful thing. And I thought, let's bring this all together. And in the end, again, from showing like all the chapters, like from the elderlies, all the COVID victims, the vaccinations, all the families, what they're dealing with their children, social distancing. Like there are so many layers to this. And it was just incredible that through a hashtag, everybody was coming towards this and they were feeding these photos and everyone had a perspective and everybody wanted to communicate. And in the end, we had this body of work. And I started, with our team looking around, where can we showcase this? And especially when galleries are closed. And we thought we can't do this. And I said, no, we're going to do this. We're going to put them on windows outside. Windows where you can print photos and we'll stick them on windows. And this is when we were very lucky that the Harborfront, they didn't, you understand, the art institutions, they were closed. So it was a perfect fit because they had some budget, because they had literally closed. And in the end, they said, we have some space, and we did this exhibit. And to this day, I could sit there and say, like, I can't believe this happened. So I want to show you this video, and you can see this. So you can put the sound louder. Can we put the sound up? Can we put the sound on? Sorry, can you hear the sound?
I'm George Pimentel, and I just wanted to say thank you to all of you who have submitted photos to the Canada COVID Portrait Project over the past 7 months. When we launched this project in April, we had one goal in mind: to create a visual diary on how COVID-19 is impacting communities across Canada. We wanted to hear your stories. To date, we have received over 5,000 photographs representing each province and territory. These images reflect the resilience and range of emotions experienced during this time, from hope to humor to grief.
Give me a thumbs up if you can hear the sound.
I want to thank our exhibition partners, the Harborfront Center and the Waterfront BIA, for helping us make this public art display a reality. It is terrific to see photos from the project in an outdoor show here in Toronto.
Okay.
I hope this exhibition
thank you so
will be the
much,
first of
George,
many,
for
and that we will be
sharing.
able
Can
to
everyone
bring
hear
this
me?
project
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
across Canada.
Yeah, I
I am
think
so
given your
proud of this
background, it's
natural
really
archive.
incredible to hear how after shooting celebrities, you can shift your focus into really thinking about how mundane moments between people not only become cherished, but worthy of archival, worthy of capture, become special standout moments. So thanks. We're going to move on to Akshata Naik, is a contemporary visual artist born and raised in Mumbai and now based in Toronto. Her works reflect upon her lived experiences of moving homes, cities, and countries through a lens of immigration, war, displacement, home, and belonging, including Bloody Boats 2.0 for ArtworxTO. Feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Melissa, for that introduction. And thank you, Katriina and team, for having me over on this amazing panel, besides incredible folks here. I do have some images to share. I think that those will run in a bit, but to talk about my art practice as an artist, it all involved around community engagement, co-creative process with the audience, and engaging the audience into the process of creation, and not just having them as a viewers in a show or post or after or pre process. So that was how involved I was with the audience while creating art, and that's what my practice included, with not just one or two people around, but like a mass of people, and then going out there, running workshops, facilitating. Oh yeah, there's the photo of the Bloody Poets, which was for the Nuit Blanche. And I cannot thank my stars enough and for the opportunity I had with this Nuit Blanche, which is an incredible opportunity just before pandemic in 2019 to see what having 4,000 people go out on a night, experience art and engage themselves and involve in it looked like. That feels like a different world altogether today. And yeah, that's what those photos remind me of, like having people without masks, happy, engaging into artworks, and it all kind of revolves around storytelling, sharing your experiences from an migration perspective. And that's what all kind of threads into my artwork or installation pieces and performances that I kind of develop. However, with pandemic, I cannot not agree with what everything that George mentioned, and totally echo his words of rediscovering my own self and pushing the boundaries that I had put myself into with digital technology, and then experimenting and exploring what that looks like. I would not have done that if it wasn't pandemic. And I literally pushed myself to explore new ways of engaging audience, but also kind of to go out there and talk to them and ask them what exactly and how they felt and how to include them in my art process. That is when I kind of got this Canada Council grant called Digital Originals, where I led kind of 16 sessions online using this new amazing gadget that I discovered called virtual reality, and a software called Oculus, the dog gadget called Oculus Quest, and the software called Tilt Brush, in which I could create art without the boundaries of space, without the boundaries of materials, without the barriers of kind of techniques and things like that. It took a lot of learning to get into it and kind of master that skill. I wouldn't say I've still mastered it. I'm still learning, and it's each day is kind of learning new things. And with technology upgrading so much at such a quick pace, it's challenging as well to kind of delve into that medium every day and learning new things. But I think pandemic gave all of us that opportunity to experience and experiment and explore without being scared of what the result would look like. And with that, for my existing or the current show, which is on for the ArtworxTO, I was able to put myself into this position of doing a live performance with audience out there. It was indoors, wearing masks, but then this was a new way that I learned to engage my audience, or bringing them into my work and engaging them into the co-creation process that I always wanted to do. And learning each day with these performances. As a visual artist, I had kind of put myself into this box of creating in isolation. However, pandemic just hit differently, and you wanted to go out, talk to people, meet new people, hear their experiences, hear their stories, and bring those into your work. And how do you do that? So as George mentioned again, like social media turned out to be a boon rather than curse during this time. I would not believe that I am saying this. As much as I hate social media, I think it's the need of the today and the future. You cannot ignore it, and you have to make use of it to the best possible way. And I think that's what got us all together in middle of this pandemic. Social media connected us in different ways. We could put, as an artist, we could put our stuff out there and kind of share our stuff. And without that, it would have been so difficult to learn what's happening across the world in different parts of the globe. And not just that, but then there were extremely incredible opportunities that showed up for someone like Katriina, who's here with us, who had this vision of sharing large-scale artworks across the city. And there was this huge initiative by City of Toronto and herself called Big ArtworxTO. I could never imagine I would do that. That was just a new piece of work I had created called Song of the Water, using virtual reality as a technique, and then having that projected on this amazing, huge building out there in by the lakeshore. That was an incredible way of seeing my own art that I had experienced then, and what people or what public art looks like in a pandemic, where they don't have to touch, they don't have to, be out there in like crowd or like gather in crowds or things like that. They could just view art at their ease, at their pace, at their comfort zone, and being safe. So these are kind of lovely things which kind of, I feel as humans, we are so amazing at adapting and evolving. And that just kind of, pandemic just kind of brought us that back to us, which is incredible. I mean, not that I would want to go back, or any one of us would want to go back into this nightmare 2 years of what we have had, but there were definitely amazing things that came out of this slowdown, or, things that came out of this time that we all got to just stop, think, research, work, and as George mentioned again, like kindness and thinking of people, thinking of what relationships matter to us, valuing people around us, valuing the time that we live in, and being in the present moment and making the most out of it, pushing ourselves as creative professionals or artists. I wear multiple hats as artists, who does not? So I kind of have a day job as programs and gallery manager at ArtworxTO, which is a local art service organization. And we, like, who in the world had ever thought arts would survive when the world is kind of, coming to a standstill? And I really feel proud of being part of such an amazing organization, the way we kind of pushed forward all the public programming we had and all the running art classes online. What does that look like? I mean, pre-pandemic, who would have thought of that? But then we all adapted to it so quickly. And today, if someone tells me show up 9 to 5 tomorrow in the office, I would be like, oh my God, I won't be able to do that. I need some time to go back to that life. But do we really want to? That's another question that we all are asking ourselves, I guess. And especially in art, it's such amazing stuff that has come up. We do not want to lose those, but then also not kind of hold on to those old ways of doing things, rather explore new ways of doing things, and which we have in this past couple years. There's this interesting project that I got to work on at ArtworxTO as programs and gallery manager, called Augmented Reality in the Village of Islington, which is another incredible project which brought in Indigenous narratives, newcomer narratives. We had amazing Indigenous artists, local artists, and artists of color who kind of came together to change narratives and lay a new narrative on the existing murals that we have in the village of Islington. I don't know if any of you have been there before, but it's beautiful collection of historic murals. And it doesn't quite represent, I mean, it's beautiful, but it doesn't quite represent the changing demographics or the narrative of the people or the community that lives in the neighborhood. And these artists kind of brought in different ways and styles of their art and kind of tailored it to digital techniques like augmented reality and virtual reality to put their new narratives on it. So you just have to hold up your phone, download the app, and hold it against the mural to see this extraordinary pieces of art that have that exists out there. And it doesn't show up there. It's kind of an invisible art. Unless you kind of see it on your phone, you wouldn't know there is art that exists. And that's what the power of new ways of exploring this media, digital arts, and technology. I mean, it always existed, but I think we all have just pushed forward our potential to achieve more and more into it. And I think that's a little bit I wanted to share about my practice and the ongoing stuff. We'll get back to you, Melissa, and happy to answer any questions after. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, I think what is really exciting about the approach to your work is that, your anchor, your creative focus around how you interact with communities, how you bring audience into the art, into the work. When you're given a circumstance where you really need to reimagine that as someone working in a creative field, you can let your imagination really soar, build new skill sets, and think about executing things with the same goal using a whole new set of tools. So I appreciate you sharing the way that you did that. Next up, we have Nicole Baum. Nicole is the Director of Education and Community Engagement at the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. During the pandemic, she developed and led the T-Sound Connections program, connecting socially isolated seniors with TSO and Toronto Symphony Youth Orchestra musicians over Zoom and Google Meet. Nicole, happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It's a pleasure to be here. So as an arts administrator myself, I have the privilege of working with the musicians of the Toronto Symphony. And at the beginning of the health crisis, the core of what we do as an orchestra, which is 90 people packed onto a stage for a crowd of 2,000 people, was suddenly impossible. And so the identity of what we would do with ourselves and moving forward kind of came to a head. And at the same time, publicly, we were seeing that there was all of a sudden a great focus on seniors in care and the isolation that they were experiencing, both physically and mentally. I mean, I think we can all reflect back on long-term care and the articles that we saw in the news that were just so emotionally impactful and shocking in a lot of ways. And the idea for this program really originated from that new reality that we found ourselves in, but also from what are known as care calls. And care calls are check-in calls that take place periodically with seniors, just to remind them of their schedules, of their health needs, maybe any medications that they need to take, and just to do a general well-being check-in, separate from any medical or doctor's appointments that they might have. And so we took that idea and blended it with, we had all of these musicians at our disposal who couldn't gather in large settings, but individually were still so talented and so, willing to share what they do so best with folks. And we took that, and that's what really the Sound Connections program grew out of. It began first with our youth orchestra musicians who they're between the ages of about 13 and 22. And they also found themselves isolated in their own world. They were out of school. They couldn't see their friends. Their extracurricular activities were canceled. And they were so keen to figure out some way in which they could give back to the community that they saw around them struggling. And so, in order to equip them with the skills that they needed in order to be successful in this way, we delivered training to our musicians with the Room 217 Foundation. And that training gave them the skills to choose what repertoire they might play that would be the most impactful. So sort of a combination of whatever they're working on, what they're passionate about, but also being mindful of the person that they're playing with and getting to know the person that they're playing for. And also the conversation component, so the tools that they might need in order to successfully approach a conversation for someone who's in long-term care, someone who is living with dementia. How do you converse with that person? And how do you navigate it in case you maybe get yourself into some trouble there? And so that gave them the confidence to go into these calls. And that program ran for about 4 weeks. And by the end of it, our youth orchestra musicians had made 54 calls to over 30 seniors at our partner organization, so at Baycrest in long-term care, in their day programs, as well as in their retirement homes. And they performed everything from Beethoven to Irish fiddle music to Frank Sinatra. It was incredibly warm to watch that take place. After that pilot ran, we then had the opportunity to expand it to include the musicians of the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. And over the course of the past season, so between September 2020 and June 2021, our musicians collectively made 200 calls to seniors at the Alzheimer's Society of Peel, as well as at Baycrest. And so just kind of in general, it really gave purpose to ourselves as an organization, also our musicians whose livelihoods had been cut off, whose social connections had been cut off, and gave them an opportunity to connect with individuals who they may not have traditionally connected with. And sort of similar to what other folks have said, sort of taking what your core identity was pre-pandemic, which for us was full orchestra concerts on a stage. That's what we do really excellent, and that's still what we do really well. But adding things to that in ways that we can use music as a universal language to give back to different segments of the community and to connect with them in ways that we might not have been able to. I mean, the seniors that we were able to connect with through the Alzheimer's Society of Peel, they're living with memory loss, and we would never see them necessarily in the concert hall. So this was an opportunity for them to sit there and enjoy music in whatever way they felt comfortable, without having to worry about clapping or their own needs. If they wanted to sit there and sing along or hum along, they could do that. If they wanted to sit there and tap along, they could do that. If they wanted to sit there and, after instructions were made, have a nap, they could do that. And so I think, in the beginning, it serves the purpose of reducing social isolation in seniors in particular. But by the end of it, I think it contributed to the well-being of both sides in the pandemic, of our musicians and of our seniors, as well as their caregivers. So it's been a really special program for me to be part of, and we are continuing it. And so I'm looking forward to see what's going to happen in the future.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Nicole. I think that's something that really stuck out to me about the way that you described the program was how, in moments where you're forced to really adapt, you can use an opportunity to actually just expand the medium of what it means to engage with live music, what it means to be an active participant, really expand the parameters of the concert hall and turn it into something new altogether. And then I think in the process, figure out how to bridge a lot of really crucial intergenerational gaps and think about the ways that knowledge for both the young musicians and then also for seniors can hopefully continue on long past the pandemic. So thank you for sharing. And our final panelist is Mitchell Chan. Mitchell is an artist who creates innovative new media installations and has exhibited across North America since 2006. Many of them are about changing human sensibility in the age of technology, including Nil for ArtworxTO. Mitchell, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Yes, my name is Mitchell Chan and I create public art. Creating public art is really fun because public art has a few unique challenges to it, and it's uniquely beautiful in a few ways. Public art is democratic. It's open to everybody. Nobody buys a ticket to go and see it, generally. You don't have to enter a gallery or cross a velvet rope. It's sort of there for everyone. And it's exciting and really challenging. And it's even a little bit dangerous because there are no real prescribed rules about how one is to engage with it, or at least not rules that are generally enforced very harshly all the time. And this is why you see some beautiful things in public art. You see kids sliding down a giant Picasso sculpture in Daley Plaza in Chicago. You see people always engaging with public artworks, that is big projects in public spaces, in ways that you as the artist would not have anticipated. And they can do this because it's open to all. And that's what's challenging and beautiful about it, and it's what excites me. So during the pandemic, I was commissioned to create an artwork by the Bentway with some generous support from ArtworxTO. And it was for their season of programming that was organized around the theme of play and how we play in public spaces. And this was an exciting topic to think about during the pandemic when public spaces don't really exist. And so now you can see the video. This is sort of what we ended up making. It's a sculpture called Nil Nil. And remember how I said that public art was exciting because there are no rules for engagement? You sort of go at it however you feel like it. One of the things that we found during the pandemic was that we found substitutes for a lot of the ways that we engage with people. But aside from, some of the great stories that we're hearing here, like I love the story about the Symphony and about how you could clap along or you could take a nap. But generally, we find that when we're engaging with people via technology, we're engaging in very, very well-defined lanes. For instance, I use Zoom for meetings, and then we all found out pretty early in the pandemic that it was kind of like not the best way to have a birthday party. And I use Discord for certain things and Twitter for others. Really, like ultra specialization is the name of the game when you're designing an app for people to connect. And this is completely antithetical to what public art is supposed to be about, which is that you use it and you engage with it however you want, and often just by accident. So Nil Nil is a sculpture of children trying to play online. And you see that they are all inframed in these cell phones. They're on Zoom, or at least an interface that looks a lot like Zoom, playing this game back and forth mediated by technology, right? And to see it at first, it looks kind of silly. In fact, it looks kind of whimsical. It's this big machine and it does stuff and the ball bounces back and forth. And then I think hopefully the longer that you engage with it, it becomes quite sort of sad if you want to run the video, again and take that second look, right? Because you realize that there's no point to this game. Kicking the ball back and forth, you know what it is? It's a metronome. It keeps time, right? And that's pretty much what it does. And the title is the final score of the game, 0-0, right? It's set up through this massive infrastructure, right? But it won't allow anyone to ever actually win in the end. No goals will be scored during this game. And so, this is my piece, and hopefully that it's, sort of fun and engaging at first, and then it's a sort of lamentation the longer that you look at it. And that was really the goal of the piece. I had a conversation with some fellow artists about what art would look like after the pandemic, or rather how we would memorialize it. Would it look like the art that came out of, some of the other great tragedies that affected artists, like the AIDS epidemic? Would it look like the art that we see that is responding to social injustice? But I think that public art is the place where, we will finally be able to create art that aims to achieve some catharsis around the pandemic, because, public space really was, the site where it was what we lost, right? And to achieve, catharsis after, a tragedy, it can't happen while we're in it, right? I believe that cathartic artwork about the pandemic, it couldn't happen in digital space because that's where we were living anyway, right? The catharsis, the great release happens that moment that you're able to step outside of it and you take that big breath and you realize, holy crap, what did I just go through? And for me, that was the moment when we could finally go outside, when we could experience this exhibition at the Bentway. We were all sort of together outside, for the first time. And with that space, we can sort of process our emotions. And so I hope that 0-0 was one example of a step towards that. And I believe that we'll see some public art like that in the future. Thank you.
Rachel, thank you so much for sharing your work with us. I think that you touched on something really salient, which is, the emotions that everybody is experiencing post-pandemic. They're complicated, and they're I think everybody's still working through it in real time. So to have a place where we can gather physically and think through those things together, I mean, to me, that kind of feels like the first step as we approach something that could potentially be a bit more cathartic. So thank you for thinking of us in that and creating work to enable us to get there. We have about 10 minutes left in this conversation. I know that I prepared a little list of questions for our panelists, and we'll see how many we're able to get through, but I think a nice place to start, given how it feels like the theme of this conversation, the theme of the last conversation, as I said, was how to make intentional work, how to think about your practice with a lot of depth. To me, this feels like adaptation, and this feels like evolution, and this feels like thinking about the work as a medium to explore a lot of larger ideas that only really public art is capable of doing. So with that in mind, I wonder how everybody thinks that public art can create unique feelings of togetherness in a city, especially now as we're reopening. Like, what is public art particular uniquely able to do that nothing else really can? And why do you think that is? And I know it's like a big question, so you're welcome to either answer it however way you want, or if it has sparked something else that you want to share that maybe you didn't get to in your presentation, you can also use that time to do that as well.
Sure, I'll jump into that because I think that the question that you asked, it leads into or extends a conversation that we were having about public art after the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we were having a lot of conversations about public art, and in particular public monuments, because we understand that art that we display in prominent public spaces ought to embody public values, right? I mean, that is how we enshrine our values. It is how we, like, you know, in some ways preserve them and even extend them. And so there's been quite a lot of conversation about, well, really, what public values are we preserving in some of these monuments? And maybe they're ones that we're not quite so proud of now, or that we need to rethink, right? And I think that there were, you know, as other people, like, for instance, as George highlighted through his photographs, there was a lot of sort of, you know, rethinking about some of our collective values that happened over the course of the pandemic. It was an opportunity for a lot of introspection, as we've seen from all the artists here, like in some ways on the creative level, in a lot of ways on the personal level, but also on like a societal level. I feel like we as a society, we did a lot of reflecting. I feel like we all came out changed a little bit on the other side. And now, you know, now that we're able to go outside again and congregate again, we have different ways of expressing those values, and hopefully a better sense of the ways that those values are shared, right? And public art will be one strategy for preserving and amplifying them.
Yeah, George, you're welcome to go.
Thanks, Mitch. That's totally well said. I just found, I'm just gonna say something about, like, during COVID, like, maybe a lot of people will or will not agree with me, but this is how I was feeling. Like, I was driving home before COVID. I was doing events, being congested in a box with hundreds of people, schmoozing and hobnobbing. And I would get invited to art openings all the time, and I would never go because I felt nobody was looking at the work. And I'm like, well, I could hobnob anytime, right? But if I'm going to go to an art opening, like, I want to look at the work. So when COVID hit, and, you know, I had the photos on the window, it was a completely different perspective, where people you could see it from the streetcar. You could go down, like, on a sidewalk on a nice day and really reflect and stand in front of this. Like, I would always, like, you know, if I went to see a show, I would say, listen, I'm going to show up and I want to see your work, but, you know, I want to go when no one's in there so I could really look at it. Like, how many times you go into the AGO or something and it's like, great, no one's in this room, and you could really take it all in. So the public art, well, that's what it's about for me. It was like I really discovered this new way of looking at work outside and just really engaging it without having a set schedule. You could go in the middle of the night if you want. Like I made the Harborfront Center leave the lights on throughout the night, so the photos would kind of be backlit at nighttime, and you could look at it during the day or at night. And I thought, like, there's no other way of looking at art, like from the street almost, you know. So that was just kind of my take on the whole COVID public art. Just to really focus on looking at the work. It's a different way of seeing it.
Yeah, and just to kind of expand on what George and both Michelle mentioned, I think it's all about accessibility and art these days. Like having free access, barrier-free access to art that is how it should be, right? Like with communities not wanting to pay for seeing art, and that's what public art allows you to do. There isn't any barrier. And as Michelle mentioned before, you just kind of come across it. It could be a sweet accident that you want to further look into and research into and, gather interest together and learn more about it, specific work or an artist. And that's an entry point for a lot of community who doesn't really have to have a high level understanding of arts to enter the world of arts. And that's exactly how I feel about dabbling my work as an artist, but also as a community arts worker often.
I want to echo what Akshata said, that I think the performing arts and symphony orchestras in general have a unique reputation of being extremely inaccessible and unwelcoming. And this was an incredible opportunity to kind of reframe that narrative and to check in on ourselves and say, what attracted us to music in the first place? And what is it about music that drew us in and made us want to make like lifelong commitments to it? And so even though, for a lot of folks, the pandemic narrowed our physical worlds a lot, because our mobility was restricted, the digital world was expanded. And I think that, coupled with just a change in mindset, really reframed the conversation around the accessibility of the performing arts, at least for me and for my colleagues, very much.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank all of our panelists for thinking through some of these really massive questions in real time, for sharing the knowledge you've gained, for sharing your insights, for being so generous with your reflections. You've given us a lot to sit with and think about. And I want to give a huge shout out to the entire ArtworxTO team. It is nearly impossible to imagine the amount of behind the scenes work that has gone on to bring this to the city, to put together programs like this, along with all of the other really incredible programming that is going on now and will continue to roll out over the course of the year. And with that, I want to conclude our second, with 1 minute left to spare, conclude our second Live at 5 ArtworxTO Talk. I hope that's the slogan. Katriina or Rebecca, please correct me if it's incorrect. And December 8th, we'll dive into our third chapter with another really wonderful roster of artists and speakers on the subject of community building and how we're reimagining wellness through the arts. And to stay up to date with everything ArtworxTO related, you can check out the website, artworxto.ca, for all our programs. If there's anything else we need to add or need to say, again, thank you to everybody involved for giving us the time and space to dive into a really great conversation. It's been a huge privilege of mine to listen in and participate.